Hello everyone. I'm Vikram. I work with Dagger. Fortunately, I'm not able to attend in person, but I just want to say I'm so super happy, super excited. This is our first Dagger India meetup, and we got some interesting stuff planned. So I hope everyone enjoys it. Um, so what I'm going to do today is I'm going to tell you a little bit of a story about pipelines, and of course, along the way, we're also going to get a little bit of an introduction to Dagger. And so the first thing I want to talk about is pipelines and software factories, and I want to explain this a little bit. If you're an app developer today, you already know about containers. Chances are you know about them at least, and you're definitely using them in your day-to-day development. And containers are great because they solved one of the major problems us developers had pre 2013, which was how do you create consistent environments for your application across dev, test, staging, production environments. And containers just basically swept this problem away because they let you package your code together with your environment and also made it very easy to run that package anywhere. So basically, once you had your container packaged up correctly, you just knew it's going to work the same way everywhere. Now, so we know containers are great. We want to use them everywhere, but they're only part of the picture. And you also need a way to build those containers. And then as you continue developing your application, you're adding features to it, you're refactoring code, you're fixing bugs, and you need a way to keep rebuilding those containers. And so obviously that's where we have our CI pipelines. And those CI pipelines are watching your code repository, and every time you make a change, they're waking up and they're taking in your source code, and they're building something. They're building an artifact, whether it's a file or a container, or it's doing a test and submitting a test report and so on. And so as your application evolves, you maybe have more than one CI pipeline. Maybe you have one which is a test pipeline, and it takes in your source code, it runs some tests, it gives you a test report. You have a build pipeline, and the build pipeline is taking in the code and building your container, and so on and so forth. And then you have all these pipelines, and these pipelines together make up your software factory. And if you look at the screen, I've got a picture of what this software factory might look like. And you can see it's looking really neat, super clean. You've got these conveyor belts, which are the CI pipelines, and they're just shipping out these really colorful, neat little containers. Um, and this is pretty cool. This is really nice little software factory that we've got going on here. And this is how things usually start out. Very clean, very simple, easy to understand. And this is an example of if you were to take that software factory and write that pipeline and code. So it's very simple. It's just you get a push, you do a build, you do a test, very easy. But as time passes, this becomes a little bit more complicated. And maybe you've got a platform team, and they want to add some stuff to it to make your code more secure. They want to add linters, they want to add a security scan, things like that. And at the same time, as developers, we are also doing more and more complicated things with it because we want to go faster. So we're using different tools, um, and we're trying out different things, and the CI pipeline just kind of starts growing. Um, and so as time passes, um, you can see it can grow to become a much larger and harder to deal with monster. And what you see on the screen, I'm going to show you this in a little bit more, but this is just an example of a CI pipeline that's just kind of grown and grown and grown over time. And this is actually more than 1,000 lines of code. And this is, as you can imagine, something that's very hard to maintain, something that's really hard to debug, and something that's really hard to change and get away from as well. And as time passes, our neat little software factory, which we saw at the beginning, it slowly starts to resemble the picture on the right side, which is it's definitely a factory, but it's not anything like what we had at the beginning. It's like a completely different beast now. And we as developers and as DevOps people, we have to actually deal with this mess. And so we can start asking the question about how did we get from that neat little thing that we had at the beginning to this mess at the end, and what are the things that have gone wrong and what is wrong today with CI. And we've seen a few different problems, and I'm going to talk about the top three that we've seen. And this is probably the most common one, which is we call this the push and pray problem. And basically, this is a situation you might have found yourself in as well, where very often you've got a piece of code, it works perfectly on your laptop, but the minute you push it up to your repository and your CI pipeline runs, it fails. And very often, if you've got a complex pipeline, it's not going to fail immediately. Maybe it'll take 10 minutes, 15 minutes, 30 minutes for it to finish running whatever it's running, and gives you back a red signal. And then you've got to go in and figure out what went wrong and push another piece of code, and try it again. And this could go on all day, depending on how long your pipeline takes. And that's why we call it push and pray, because at some point, um, you're basically just pushing a piece of code, and you can look at a screen, and this is an example of someone praying, right? They're just pushing code and praying that, hey, let's just hope we get a green light next. And so another problem we've seen is what we see here, which is portability. And if you're using CI, you're familiar with using YAML to define your pipeline. Um, but every CI provider uses their own dialect of YAML. And so, for example, if you're using GitHub Actions YAML and you decide, hey, let's switch to GitLab or to Circle or any of the other CI providers, it's not very simple. It's not just a lift and shift. I can't just take my GitHub Actions file, put it into GitLab and expect it to work. So yeah, you got to spend some time learning GitLab's version of YAML and migrating your code over and testing it and so on. And again, if it's a very complex system, this can take time. It requires a lot of effort. It requires a lot of testing and verification. And often what happens is you decide that, okay, this is pretty complex, and maybe this is going to take a few weeks. And so while we are migrating, let's keep both the systems running in parallel. So we have our existing CI in, say, GitHub, and the new one that we're going to migrate to in the other provider, and let's just keep them both running in parallel until we've completed the migration. And this just makes things, you essentially double your maintenance and your debugging problems, because you've got to maintain two parallel pipelines temporarily. And this is another very common one, and I've put back the photo that you saw earlier of the really complicated CI pipeline. And this is I want to actually switch away for a second, and I want to show you what one of these pipeline scripts could actually look like. So I just want to check, can you guys see my screen again? This should be Visual Studio Code that you're seeing.
Yep, we can.
All right. So this is an example of this is an actual real CI file. We have it from a user. It's been anonymized, so you don't know what project it is. But this is actually an actual pipeline, and it's just YAML. And I'm just going to scroll really fast, um, so you get an idea of the scope of this. Yeah, I'm still going. And so it's more than 750 lines of YAML. And so, as you can imagine, debugging this is going to be really hard, because if something goes wrong, you've got to go through those 700 lines of YAML, figure out what happened, and try to fix it. So it's hard to diagnose. And so the conclusion we have is that we have this software factory, but it's kind of gone off the rails a little bit, and we need to kind of fix it. um, we need to retool the factory, except that it's not a physical factory. We don't have to buy new equipment, we don't have to do any of those things. It's software. So all we need to do is basically reboot that factory with better software and a better design. And if we think about this a little bit more, we come to another insight, and this is an important one, which is that a lot of the problems that we're seeing with CI today is similar to the problems we saw with application development pre 2013. Um, so, for example, if you have scripts which you're using to set up your environment, but those scripts are written in Bash or in other shells, and they're not super consistent. They tend to break sometimes depending on environment factors on the operating system and so on. There are inconsistencies in environments, so inconsistencies between your laptop environment and your CI environment, which is why you have the push and pray problem. The code works locally, it doesn't work in CI. And if you remember, the way we solved that problem in 2013 was with containers. Docker came in and we found a way to package code and environment together. And so we can start thinking, if we treat pipelines as just specialized applications, hey, why don't we, well, we already solved these problems with containers. Why don't we just try using containers to solve these CI problems as well? Because we know that works, and it kind of takes away a lot of these problems. And if you start going down that path a little bit more, you realize, okay, this is a good idea, but there are a few twists to it. um, and the first one is that anything that we come up with, it needs to be fully programmable, because it's not enough to just run every step of your pipeline in a container, because the pipeline logic itself involves running containers, outputting containers, and so on. And so you need a way for containers to be able to create other containers, to manage other containers, to orchestrate them together, to connect them, to clean them up once you're done, and so on. And so you need a way to kind of program these containers to make them work with each other in different ways. um, and the second thing that you have to realize is that a pipeline isn't like a traditional application, in the sense a pipeline is not a result, it's a flow of things. So by that, what I mean by that is that um, you start with an input, which is maybe your Git repository, and your pipeline takes in that Git repository and it does something with it. It maybe runs tests and it outputs a test report, and so that test report file is an artifact. And then you run a build, and again the output of that is maybe a compiled binary or a file of some kind or a container. And so you have all these artifacts which are going in at one end like source code and coming out the other end like files and directories and containers. And so your pipeline is just this flow of artifacts. And so your pipeline needs to be able to recognize this and say, hey, I need to know what is a container, what is a directory. I need to be able to handle, for example, credentials, so that I can authenticate with the Git repository and get my code, so that I think I can authenticate with a container registry to push my container when it's done, and so on. And so whatever we come up with, it has to have the built-in ability to understand files and directories and network services and secrets and all of this stuff. Um, and so this is exactly what we are trying to build at Dagger. It's a completely new way to work with CI and CI pipelines. And I want to talk a little bit now about what Dagger is and what it does. And so this is kind of the big picture, bird's eye view of Dagger. And at the heart of Dagger is what we call the Dagger engine. And this is basically a next generation container engine. And it works together with, it's controlled by what we have, by an API that we have, which is called the Dagger API. The Dagger API is it's a GraphQL based API, and it comes with built-in primitives for all those things that I talked about: containers, directories, files, sockets, secrets, services. It has these built-in primitives, and you can access and use these primitives by calling the API. And to call the API, we give you SDKs. So we have SDKs for Go, TypeScript, and Python at the moment. And we also have a number of experimental SDKs which have been contributed by the Dagger community. So we have SDKs for Java, for Elixir, for PHP, and a bunch of other languages. And what this lets you do is um, do what I talked about before, which is program your containers and program your artifacts together so that they're able to interact with each other in logical ways depending on your requirements. Um, One of the other things that this lets you do is, because we are using containers for everything, we get complete reproducibility, we get complete portability. So your Dagger pipeline can run on your laptop, it can run in your CI environment, it can run on a server. It runs the same way everywhere because your entire pipeline is running in containers. And so this kind of just eliminates the push and pray problem, because you no longer have to make code changes locally and then wait for remote CI to tell you whether they're good or not. You can just run your CI pipeline on your laptop and you get instant feedback, whether that pipeline passes or fails. So it cuts the feedback loop significantly. And the other thing that Dagger does is it caches everything that it does, and so your pipelines run a lot faster as well. So again, it shortens that feedback loop. So instead of waiting maybe 30 minutes to get a signal from your CI, you're maybe waiting 1 minute, 2 minutes, and you're seeing instant feedback on your pipelines locally on your laptop. And you'd know that once you fix it and your local CI pipeline running on your laptop is green, you just know that it's also going to be green wherever else it's running. Now, the other thing that's important when we are talking about pipelines are teams, and usually what happens is you're not developing your application in isolation. You're working in a team of developers, and maybe you have another team or other people who are working on the CI pipelines. You've got a DevOps team or a platform engineering team, and every team has their own favorite language, their own favorite tools. um, Maybe you're working in TypeScript, your DevOps team likes Go, someone else is using Java, and so on and so forth. And the important thing is that you're never going to get complete agreement from everyone and complete buy-in from everyone to use a single language across the company. And of course, the larger the company, the more difficult it is. And so you need to just toss that out of the way and say, hey, it's never going to be the case that there is one single language that everyone uses. There's one single build tool that's going to win. um, we have to be pragmatic and say there are going to be different tools, and we need them all to kind of work with each other. And so and so whatever solution, whatever we are building here, it has to be cross language. And so what we have is we have what we call Dagger functions, and Dagger functions are a fundamental unit of computing in Dagger. They're pieces of program code, exactly like normal programming functions. They take inputs, they have outputs, and you write them in whichever language you're comfortable in. And once you write them, you package them up in what we call modules, and you can share those modules with other people in your team, with other teams, or even across the Dagger community with other Daggernauts. Um, and the interesting thing about these is that they're completely cross language. So that means that you might write a Dagger function in Go, and maybe someone in a different team has an application in TypeScript and they want to use this Dagger function that you wrote. They can actually just import it into their TypeScript environment and call your function using native TypeScript bindings. They don't need to learn Go, and you don't need to learn TypeScript to be compatible with them. Everything just works regardless of which language it's been written in. And of course, the problem that we talked about earlier, which is, very pipelines which are very hard to debug. And we're very conscious of this issue that when you're building a pipeline, you need to be able to see exactly what's happening in the pipeline. You need to be able to inspect it. And so we have Dagger Cloud, which is basically a web-based interface to visualize your pipelines. Dagger Cloud is completely free for individual use, and I'll show you a demo of it in a little while. But basically, it gives you a web-based dashboard. As your pipeline runs, you can see in real time what's happening in the pipeline, what operations it's performing. whether it's using the Dagger cache, which operations are being cached and which ones are not, how long each operation is taking, and it basically gives you a complete deep dive into every pipeline run that you have. And if there's an error, it flags it, so you can see exactly where the error is. It brings it to the top of the list, and it basically simplifies debugging of pipelines. You can also share those Dagger Cloud visualizations. We call them traces. You can share them with other people in your team so that people can work together and see it. And it's a great way to kind of start building more complex pipelines, because we've taken away the difficulties that you would usually have trying to debug a complex pipeline. So that's the quick overview. And what I want to do next is give you a demo, a little bit of how Dagger works. Um, yeah, I just want to check, is everyone following along? Do you need me to go back or anything, or explain something quickly before I get into the demo?
I think we're good to go. And everyone, if you want to unmute to ask any questions as we're going through the demo and stuff, feel free to do so. We want to make it as interactive as possible for all of you.
Yeah, awesome. All right, so hopefully you guys can see that I have Visual Studio on my screen. Okay, I'm going to assume everyone can see it. Um, so what I'm going to do in this demo is give you a quick overview of Dagger functions and build a function basically that's going to build an application and publish it. And for this, we're going to use Go. And I'll start by, we're just going to clone a very simple, the Golang example repository, which has a simple kind of hello world example in it.
I think there
And
might be some questions from the audience on
okay,
the.
cool. Let me. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through this demo really quick, and then we can come to the questions. So right, so this is just a very simple Go program, and I want to just make sure. Okay, hopefully everyone can see this, and we're going to start off by just initializing a new Dagger module. And so that's created basically a very simple placeholder module. And if you look at it, it's got some example functions in it. And we're going to start with something pretty simple. So let me just create just a simple function to explain how it works. And the interesting thing to note here is that I'm writing this function in Go and my IDE, and as you can see, it's giving me hints that, okay, there's something wrong over here. And if I hold over it, I can see exactly what it is. And so it's basically this. And now, so we have this very simple function here called hello. And what it's doing is it's creating a container from the Alpine image, and it's simply running a simple command in that and giving you the output. And now once you've written a function, you just call it with the Dagger CLI, and we just do Dagger call hello. I'm just gonna raise that. And as you can see, what Dagger did was, this is it did exactly what it said. It took a container, it ran a command in it, and it gave us the output on the console. This is just a very simple example which is just explaining how it works, but let's do something a little bit more useful right now, because we have our source code, and what we're going to do is try and build it. So let's have a new function, and let's call it build. And you remember what I said, that our API lets you work with primitives like containers. And so we'll say that we want this pipeline actually to return us a container. And so we'll start with Alpine. And the first thing we're going to do in this container is very similar to what you would do if you were using a Docker file. We're going to add some tools that we need. In this case, we want to build with Go, so we are adding Go. And then obviously, the next thing we want to do is we want to add our source code to it. And so we have an API method for that. And what we're going to do is we're going to mount it in source, but we need to also tell it where the directory is. So we add a argument to our function. Let's call it source. And we're saying that's our directory. Next, we change the working directory. So, and finally, I think we are ready to build it. So we say, let's do exec. And let's look at some hints. And let's see if that container. Container, and just checking that it's all looking good. I don't know why that's happening. Let's remove some of these other functions. And so we have this function. And actually, before we build it, I want to show you something else, which is, let me just remove those two lines. And let's do this Dagger call build. And we are passing it the source, which is our current directory. And what this should do is it should create a container from Alpine. It should add into that container the Go binary, and also add the source directory. And as you can see, it has created a container because that's the output over here. But how do we know that these things are actually present in that container? And one of the most powerful features of Dagger is what we call an interactive debugger, which means that you can drop into your pipeline at any point and see exactly what's going on. So let's say we want to just check this container and have a look inside it. And so we just add the terminal command at the end. And what this does is it gives us an interactive terminal, so that we are now actually inside the container itself at the point where the function ends. And we can have a quick look around. And so let's see if we have some Go there. Yeah, we can see we have Go. Let's check if the source is there as well. So yeah, and we see that we have, this is our Git repository. We have the hello folder over here, and we have a file called hello.go as well. And we can have a look in that file, and yeah, it's got all our coordinates, so it's good. So let's continue. So we continue building out our Dagger function. This time we can proceed with the build. Um, we know that it's going to build something, and so let's try that again. And so as you can see, it's actually moving forward from where it was earlier. It had the source code and Go. Now it's actually building it, and again it's returning us a container. As before, if you want to drop in and have a look,
We
you
have
just
done
run
the
it again.
dynamic validate builder as well.
Sorry, I didn't hear that. So we've dropped into the container. This time the build is now complete, and so let's have a look, and we can see we do have a binary here. Oh, we don't have file. Okay, we can actually do that, and we can see we have a binary. We can run it. It says hello world. So we are in the container, which it returned. It has the binary in it. So that's our first Dagger function. Actually, this file has two of them. We have the hello world as well. And if you want, the Dagger CLI lets you basically check what functions are available at any time. You just run Dagger functions, and it shows you, well, we have a build function, we have a hello function. And what we're going to do is we're going to add one more now. Because so you have a container. Usually when you have a container, you want to do something with it. Let's assume in this case we want to publish it, and so we're going to create a new function, and let's call it publish. um, and we keep this the same, but in this case when we publish it, when we publish it, what we actually want in this case is an image address. So if you publish it to Docker Hub or any registry, it's going to give you the registry address. And so in this case, the output that we want is a string. And now we don't need to do all of this stuff again because we just did it in the previous function. And so we can simply call it by saying, and so this is, we're calling one Dagger function from another one, just like you would do in any regular programming language. Um, and now we have this container, and now we need to get it ready for publishing. And one of the things we want to do is we want to add an entry point to it. And the entry point is going to be the binary that we just compiled in the container. And once that's done, let's publish it. In this case, we will publish it to temporary registry that we have. Let's call it um, my container. Yeah, cool. And let's try this. So we can see, and let's add a comment here, publish a container. And if we run Dagger functions again, we see it, which it should show you, you've got a new function added now called publish. And let's try Dagger call publish. As you can see, we said we need to know the source directory. I missed that, so let's add that. And what this is going to do is the publish function calls the build function, which does the build. And you notice that it actually did this very fast because it detected that there was no change in the source code and the previous build was cached. So it simply used the cache layers and is now just focusing on publishing. And in case we change it, let's assume that we quickly change the source code here. Whereas, let's say, and now let's try running it again. And this time you'll see that Dagger has detected that, oh, there was a change in the source code. I can't use my cache. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to build it again. Yeah, just waiting for it to publish, and the output of this should be a reference. Yeah. And this is just a regular container image. We can run it. Yeah. And there you see that's our published image. So that was our very simple pipeline. Um, built an image, published it, and you can run this. If you run it again, for example, um, should detect there's no change. Be very very fast. As you can see, it realizes there's no change anywhere. I've not changed anything, so it just uses the cache, and that was almost instant. Okay, so that was a quick demo. We don't have to. We have other speakers as well, so I'm going to wrap up now. Um, just want to leave you with this. We really we have a very active Discord. We do encourage people to come in and ask questions if you're interested in using Dagger. Please come in. All of us in the team are on Discord. We'll be happy to answer questions that you have. Come and tell us what you're working on. And if you want to get a little bit more into Dagger, we have a quick start. It walks you through the basics. It shows you a few more things that I didn't have time for in this demo. So do try it out. And like I said, I'm can't wait to be with you in person next time. And enjoy. We can't wait to see what you guys build.